In this video, I'm going to show you how you can dynamically format your reports so that when you change things like add extra data or change the sort order, the formatting will follow everything in the report and it will still look great. And this will save you a load of time reformatting, putting new borders on areas of the report, for example, moving things around just to make it look good. I'm actually going to show you two ways to do this. One is the quick way, but very risky in my view. And the second way is the absolute belt and braces version, which will never go wrong no matter what you do, which is the way I would always suggest you build anything in Excel. So I'm going to start with this report here, and you can download this completely for free. I'm not going to ask for your email address or anything like that. Instantly down to your computer. It's all completely set up. And also all of the final conditional formats, any helper cells that we're using, etc., are all in there too. So it's a great way of working along. Now this report, it looks reasonable. It's got some decent sort of graphics to show the variances, but it's very hard to work out kind of where things are changing, like each region. If you're interested in one particular region, it's not great, which is why I'm going to eventually make it look something like this. And this will allow you to sort and filter and the formatting to follow the regions, which is what we're trying to achieve here. I'm going to start with what I would call the risky version of this. It's simpler in many ways, but it's not quite as robust if you're going to start inserting sort of new data and stuff like in the middle of these reports. So it might sort of break, and I'll show you how it might break in a minute. I'm then going to move on and show you how you can do a kind of belt and braces version of this, something that can't go wrong no matter how much you sort of try and mess it up. Having said that, there's always someone that's going to mess up your spreadsheet if you give it to them. So, don't hold me to that. The risky solution. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to add a helper column, which I'm just going to format version 1 for now. What I want that to do is basically for every time the region changes, the number in that column will change. I'm only going to show you this with two formats, say like 1 and 0 to keep it simple. There's no reason why you couldn't have like multiple numbers or even a completely different color for every region as it is in this report or every change in a particular column. This is reasonable. This will cope with like sorting and filtering data pretty well, which is, the crux of what we're trying to achieve. What I'm going to then move on to is showing you how you can cope with people sort of inserting and deleting rows and things like that, because this is where this one really causes problems. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to detect if the region is changed, and if it is, we want a different number to appear in this column. Now we can make our lives so much simpler on things like this by turning this into an Excel table. So I'm going to do that right now. Hit the Control-T shortcut. And you can also find that on the menu if you go to Insert Table. Ask me where my data is. It's detected it because it's in the right kind of format. And I'll hit OK. And, instantly it looks a lot worse. But don't worry about that because we hit the Table Design menu. And I'm going to remove all the formatting that's just put on completely. So now we have a table that Excel recognizes that area. It treats it like an object. It'll make formula writing a lot easier, for example, but we don't have to worry about all these sort of stripy formats and that. So we can put our own on. What are we trying to do here then? So I want to know if the region is the same as the region above, because if it is the same, I just want my previous answer essentially. And if it's changed, I want a new answer. Now, I'm not going to do it on the first row. I'll show you why. Because if I say, let's go over there, if that region equals the row above, when I click on the row above, it recognizes it as the table header. And that's no good. So I'm just going to come out of that. I'm going to write the formula further down. And this is one of the beauties of using tables. It doesn't matter where in the column you write the formula. It's just going to apply it to the whole column anyway. So I'm going to say, is that region equal to the region above? And I get a bunch of trues or falses. I'm going to turn that into an if statement. And I'm going to say that if it is true, I want it to be the row above. Okay? If it's not true, what are we going to do? Well, we need to check what the row above said, because if that statement is not true, it means the region has changed. So we need to, rather than make it equal to the row above, we need to change the number above. So I'm going to put another if statement here, and I'm saying if the row above was equal to a 1, make it a 0. If it wasn't equal to a 1, I'm going to make it a 1. I don't know if you can see, we've effectively got like a whole load of 1s there. They're all 1s. And then this lot, they're all 0. And then it changes to 1 again. And then 0. So it appears to work. Can it withstand sorting and filtering though? So let's have a look at sorting first. I'm going to change this sort order. Certainly it looks to have worked. So that's all southwest there. There's southeast here. All zeros. So yes, it's kind of working fine. So let's just assume that that's going to work in all circumstances for the moment and apply some conditional formatting. On the home menu, go to conditional formatting, and we're going to put on a new rule because we're going to need a formula for this. So formula, what's the formula? Formula is going to be, if this cell equals 1, then we're going to do some kind of formatting. And if it's 0, we're not going to do some kind of formatting. It's fairly straightforward. But we don't want these dollar signs around here because we need it to apply to look at every row individually. So column K fixed is fine, but we just need to make sure we don't fix the row number. The format, well, let's just fill it with this mid-grey at the moment. You can pick your own, that's okay. And what have we got? We've got a single cell formatted. Why is that? Because I didn't set the area it applies to. So I need to set the area that applies to as the whole table. So I just clicked anywhere in the table there and hit Control A to apply it to the whole table. Just double check that that has now changed to K5, which is fine. That's what we want. So we can apply that. And as soon as we hit that apply, it's changed it to K1. So we just need to make sure that we get that in sequence with the apply area. So that starts at 5, so that needs to be looking at the start at 5. So just change that to say K5 and apply that. Let's hit OK. And now we have our sort of formatted report here. It can withstand sorting like this. It can withstand filters. So that's just a budget greater than 0 or versus budget greater than 0. You can see. So it's a pretty good solution, right? It's a pretty good solution. But let me show you how this can go wrong. I've got some extra regional data here for the West Midlands. Let's insert some rows. I would always suggest inserting rows in a table and then pasting the values in rather than kind of trying to like insert rows and stuff when you're dealing with conditional formats. There's a link in the video description that goes back to a previous video of mine, the tips about conditional formatting. That's a big one. Anyway, I'm going to insert a row here. I'm going to get this extra data and I'm going to paste it in as values. And this is about, like I say, the safest way you can ever sort of put stuff into a report like this. I'm then going to delete these rows from the table. Now, of course, it's kind of messed up a bit at the moment because I've inserted them in the middle of another county. But if I sort that report, you would think that that would solve that problem. But you can see that it hasn't. The northeast has effectively been split in two. And the reason for this is that these formulas are no longer tracking the cell above. But if you start messing about with rows in tables and you have formulas that are linking to rows outside of the current row, you're always at risk of this sort of thing happening. This is why this solution is risky if you're going to be inserting or deleting rows. So how do you solve this? Right. Well, the key is that we need to make sure that none of our formulas directly reference rows outside of the current row. So in other words, they don't say, is the row above equal to the current row? because once you link directly, you say things like B4 or A6 or something, that row can change depending on where you insert and delete rows, and that's what we need to avoid. So there's various functions we can use for that, which I'll show you right now. This is our previous report with up to this column here. I've put the format V1 in. And we're going to use this time 4 helper columns, which might seem like a lot, but you could put this in one formula, but I'm trying to keep it structured so you can follow what on earth is going on. And we're going to set up these 4 helper columns to effectively create the exact same answer, but in a far more robust way. It doesn't matter how many rows or columns we delete. It doesn't matter which, we can insert cells, we can, copy and paste the thing around the screen. It's robust enough to cope with pretty much anything anyone will throw at it, other than somebody just coming in and destroying all your formulas, which is always a risk, of course. The first thing I want to do is detect the table row. So where are we in the table? Because we can use that information to detect where we are and where the previous row or the next row might be, as long as this formula is dynamic. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to use the row function. So equals the row of, well, we might as well pick the region. We'll stick with the region, the row of the region. Okay. Straightforward. The only problem is it starts with 5. And I want it to start with 1. And the reason it starts with 5 is because we're on row 5 of the spreadsheet. And the easiest way to do that is deduct the row of the header. And the header, because of the way table referencing works, that will always be fixed. It actually says, hash header in the formula here. So we'll do that. We now have a table row. Now that's just that formula alone actually is quite useful for creating like indexes on tables, and that would always work. It doesn't matter how I sort this. These numbers will always show from 1 to whatever. They're not linked in any way to the data. Just to demo that, if I sort this in a different order, you'll still see it's showing 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Next, we need to know what is the region before the one we're on, so that we can check, for changes. And I'm going to use the index function for this. Now, I'm purposely starting somewhere down the middle so that I don't get involved with picking up headers or anything like that. But I'm going to say the index and the array are region. Hit control space there to pick up the entire region column. And we'll say which row of the region. Well, it's the row before this one. So it's the table row that we just worked out minus 1. You can see that that's worked in pretty much all rows, apart from the first one where there's a spill error. And the reason for that is that it's in the top row and it couldn't sort of pick up the row before because it's saying give me a 0, row 0 doesn't exist. So we just need to correct for that, and we'll put an if statement at the front, basically that says, if the table row equals 1, then we'll just say not applicable for the moment. Otherwise, do our formula. So now we have our sort of preceding region, which on every row just says what the previous row was. So this one's east of England, and the previous row said East Midlands. So that's going to detect there's some kind of change there. And let's put that formula in next, right? Let's detect whether that's changed. So if this is not equal to that, then we got a new region. So we're going to put a 1. Otherwise, we don't have a new region. We're going to put a 0. And you can see now we have our new region showing at the beginning of each change. Now, the great thing about these formulas is that none of them refer to anything outside of their current row. They either refer to an entire column or the current row. So that one, for example, current row. This one, current row. That one, current row. So it's completely robust in terms of inserting and deleting rows. It's not going to throw any kind of formulas out, no hash refs, nothing like that. So what are we going to do with our format? Now, there's various ways you could sort of detect changes and things like this, but one way I found, which is quite good, is to sum from the header downwards. This will then add effectively 1 to each time we see a change in region. So let's do a sum. We'll click on the header, and that fixes that reference, and it doesn't matter where the table moves, the header moves with it, so it'll always be correct. It'll always start at the beginning. And we're going to put a colon on the end, and then to the current row, and close those brackets. And we'll do that. Now we get a sequential number that again references 2 fixed positions all the time. So it can't really go wrong. And let's demonstrate that by, if I completely sort this in a completely wacky order, let's say like numerical order or whatever, we just see these numbers going up. Now what I want to do is turn that into 1s and 0s as per our previous format, and then just switch our conditional format onto our new formula, our new, more robust formula, and I'll demonstrate why in a second. And the way I'm going to do that is to embed the entire formula in the mod function. Now, the mod function basically just leaves you with a remainder after you've divided something. So, for example, what I'm going to do here is divide the whole thing by 2. And so all the even numbers will end up as a 0 because there'll be no remainders. And all the odd numbers will end up as 1s because that's the remainder if you divide by 2. So it's an ideal function for this job. So let's put it like that. Hit enter. We now have our 1s and 0s, and it should in theory be exactly the same as this column at the moment because we're not messing about with it. I'm going to trace the precedence of this formula all the way through and see what happens. And you can see at no point do any of those lines refer to anything other than entire blocks of cells or the current row or header. If we remove that arrow and we go back to the original and trace the precedence, you can see that the way it's moving, we've got diagonal lines. It's dependent on the row before. What's that done for us? Well, nothing much to start with, for example, because this was working before. But let's just delete, say, the entire Northwest region. Look at the Format 1 column. We have all these hash refs, yet this new Format 2 column is working it out perfectly where the changes of regions are. So if we go back to our conditional format, manage the rules, and instead of K1, we now link that to column O, our new formula, and hit OK and apply. We have it working perfectly well, regardless of how many rows we delete, how much we insert, how much we mess about with this, it's always going to work. And that is going to save you time in the long run if you can get a system like this up and running. We can now delete our original, and we can hide our helper columns, Control 0, and we have a completely robust report that's capable of inserting rows, deleting rows. Pretty much doesn't matter what you do to this other than destroy the formulas. And if you want this finished version with all these formulas in it complete, then look in the description, download the workbook there. I won't ask you any questions and you'll get it straight away to play around with. Make sure you check out the next video where we'll be dealing with reports that are automatically changing lengths from drop-downs and how you go about creating automatic formats for them, which is a must-watch video.